Please welcome Brad Rushing. Come on up, Brad. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So why don't we just start the ball rolling by telling us, why don't you tell us about Eminem? Did you work on Eminem's videos? Is that what I'm given to understand?
Well, I photographed a video called Without Me, which was one that had a lot of different vignettes with Eminem playing various characters. He played his interpretation of Elvis and his interpretation of Robin and his interpretation of a couple of terrorists. So
he did a good job of that, didn't he?
It was a lot of fun. It was. I mean, the guy is tremendously full of energy, really energetic, very spontaneous with ideas. You know, oftentimes when we work with, every artist has their different, has their own personality. And, some of them, they just pop off with ideas, and right in the middle of your plan, you're taking a left turn and reinventing, and we had a little bit of that, which is great. It's just the nature of the creative mind. We shot it with some special lenses. They're what they call probe lenses, and they require a really high T-stop. They require a lot of light. So we had huge lights all over this set. I mean, it was so bright and so hot, and those lights are expensive. The producer just had a vein bulging every time we asked for more stuff.
Do you do your own lighting, or do you hire a lighting director?
Well, as a cinematographer, you're responsible for the camera work and the lighting, and you oversee those departments. And to the extent that which you may actually operate the camera or be a little more hands-on with the lighting is an individual type of thing. Myself, I started out in the camera department, but became very interested in the lighting aspect of it. My background is in fine art, so I'm just very visually oriented. So I do all of it. I do a little bit of all of it. The more advanced you become, the more complex your shoots become. You have to let go of some things, so I don't operate the camera quite as much as I used to. And also this past year, I've started directing a few things as well. So.
Do you edit in addition to shoot?
I edit. I don't edit professionally. I haven't. I know how to edit because. Coming up in the business, you become a little bit of a jack of all trades, and I think it's something important, and again, something that would probably translate for your student. You may be a guitar player, but I think it's the more you understand about the people around you and what they're doing and the way that, the material that you're creating is going to go into this production process and this post-production and this delivery and dissemination process. The more you understand about all those things, the more command that you have to interface with them and to understand how what you're creating is going to transfer across that delivery pipeline.
I was going to ask you how you interface with the director. Do you get to help frame the shot, or do they pick that, or how does that work?
Well, again, that's a really individual type of thing. You have different directors. You have some directors who just have an exact vision, and very often, sometimes, like for instance in commercials. In commercials, you work with an agency, and that agency just spells it out to you. You shoot it, they take it away, and they do whatever they're going to do. Some directors are far more collaborative, and I like that middle ground of collaboration. And then you have other directors who are kind of like, well, I'm going to handle the talent, and you just make the pictures, which is fine, but it's even, and I'm sure the folks in this class who are musicians understand. When your collaborators have something to put into the pot, you have kind of a better idea of what you guys are making together rather than just, shooting blind. And so that middle ground is what I prefer. And I'm very fortunate that I can work with people who I like, and that's one thing that I suggest. And it was a deliberate choice that I made even before I could technically afford to make it, is make a point of working with people that you enjoy. And I've told people many times, this is one of the first things that I told Chris Sod when he came into town. The jobs that you turn down are often as important or more important than the ones you accept. When I was first coming up in the business, you'd meet a lot of people who were really bitter, who'd been in it for years and years and didn't take satisfaction, didn't have pride, didn't enjoy what they were doing. And I began to kind of pay attention to what their history had been, what their relationship with the business had been. And, I just found that rather than making deliberate, calculated strategic choices of which jobs they were going to do, which avenue of the business they were going to get in, and with whom they were going to collaborate. They sort of went where the winds took them.
Oh.
You know, and it's easy for people outside the entertainment business, and I'll include, you know, music and theater and all that in this. It's easy for people outside the entertainment business, I think, to have a bit of a jaded view of the types of people in it. You know, especially in towns like LA and New York. I'm originally from Houston, you know, so I have a bit of that Southern cordiality about me, and, you know, I try to be nice to everybody, and I'm very polite. And I think that there is sort of a stereotype that people have, that people are really, you know, there's a lot of conniving, manipulative, self-serving folks in the business. My experience of it is it's no greater than a cross-section of society. It's just that because of where the spotlight is shining, they're just that much more memorable. You know, just like scandals that you see in the news. You know, it's not like that there's a whole bunch of people out there doing all this stuff. It's just they're the ones that are taking center stage. Mm-hmm. So, again, it's a matter of choosing, you know, finding the people that you click best with. And so I have always been on the lookout for that. And whereas I can take jobs and command top dollar, I'm always looking out on the periphery to see what are the opportunities that are arising that are not necessarily a pecuniary motivation, but a creative opportunity. And because oftentimes, whether you're starting out or whether you're advancing in your career or wherever you are, it's those opportunities. You begin to realize that your body of work defines what people are going to call you to do. Mm-hmm. What you have done in the past, what you're able to show, what people know you as, that's what they're going to think of you for. So you need to make some deliberate choices. And you know, for instance, myself, I am a big fan of period pieces. I'm a big fan of science fiction type stuff. And if you look at my work, which by the way, if you guys want to check it out, I have a website. Just go to my name, bradrushing.com, and you'll see a lot of links. You'll see music videos, commercials, some feature stuff there. But I've made choices to do these types of things. And oftentimes it's collaborating with people. I just recently did a short film, and the directors were visual effects artists from Superman. You know, it was a really great script, but it was also a strategic decision because, you know, these people do interesting work. They've got a lot of potential, and I'm helping them launch their careers as directors.
Really? When you get a job working on a Mariah Carey video or others, how do you address that? Is it, I mean, you can tell a story, you can try to tell the story of the song, you can tell something independent of the song. How do you go about it?
Well, I think the tendency is very much against telling the story of the song, very much so. I mean, to the point of deliberately not. It's more of evoking a mood. It's more of creating memorable imagery. You know, one of my favorite videos of all time, and this again reconnects to what I was saying about being forced to be innovative. You know, if you take away all your tools and you take away all your resources, well, you got to be clever, because ultimately a video is about people remembering what they see. You know, this is why you guys send YouTube links to your friends, because it's like, that's really cool, you know? And it could be that somebody just does something just so darn unbelievably goofy that you just got to tell everybody, but you want to create a wildfire, you know? So it's all about the personality of the artists. You're going to do something different for Christina Aguilera than you're going to do for, you know, a band that's got a quirkier personality. And you just have to find what that band, you know, Eminem, we don't do glamour videos for Eminem, you know, but we sure don't do goofy videos for Mariah Carey. And that comes, you know, from them and their management and how they want to be perceived. Sometimes an artist wants an image change, and you're responsible for it. But that's something you become really aware of, whether you're shooting a commercial with a product or you're shooting a music video or even a feature, you know, and you're working with a name actor. You hold in your hands their reputation. Commercials just across the board pay best by virtue of the fact that they are commercial. You know, music videos used to pay as well or better than commercials. Music videos have gone through a transition in the past 3-4 years. The advent of downloading music, the advent of peer-to-peer exchange of music, the loss of income off of that music, which is I'm sure is a topic that you folks talk about all the time, and I'm sure it's a real dichotomy because you've got young people here who can't afford to go out and buy all the CDs, and at the same time you're in the business that if you're downloading free music, you're stealing from the hand that's going to feed you. So all those things really came to the forefront, and when it first exploded and the revenues first started dropping, a lot of the record companies began to slash their music video budgets. They slashed the numbers of music videos they shot. There was a time when a music video director's fee, the director's fee alone, is more than most music video budgets now. And I really can't afford to work on music videos anymore. If I work on one, it's because it's there's a reason. There's a reason other than money. And oftentimes it's frustrating because even if I say, I don't care about the money, I'll work for free, you have to realize that budget's not just about remuneration. Budget is also about resources. It's about time. It's about who can you hire. It's about what locations can you afford. And I had an experience once where we were shooting in a hangar, an abandoned airport hangar down near Santa Monica called Barker Hangar. And I was working with a producing and directing team that typically worked with folks who had less experience and maybe less name cachet than I have. But they looked at my work and they said, we'd like to bring this fellow and his aesthetic intuition to our project. So we went and we scouted it, and I placed a lighting order. Now this place is huge, it's enormous. And we put the band at the center of it. I put a big what they call a soft box, a big soft light over them. And then I put these lights, these things they call cyc lights, which are strips of lights at intervals around the edge to light up the perimeter so that you saw the scope of this tremendous location that they'd paid an arm and a leg for. And when that quote came back for that equipment, I literally seriously had a producer say to me, can't you just light them with a couple of 2Ks, which are relatively small lights? I said, sure. I said, I can do that. You're not going to pay this location, you're not going to see this location you've paid for, and you're not going to get the aesthetic that you've paid for in me and my crew. And it's that sort of a thing where, people can look at my reel and they can look at my work, but just having me physically present doesn't bring about, the world. You have to have the resources, and that's one of the things that I've had to learn. Obviously, something that one of your professors was talking about at the beginning of this class was a lot of business classes, and I honestly think that even artists, even people who aren't in the business side of it, I think artists should take business classes. I wish that in my film school education they had made us take business classes, because you get out of film school and you say, ooh, I'm an artist. Well, you're an artist beholden to business. Commercials are business. Music is business. Features are business. Somewhere along the line, it's business. Somebody, unless you're just an artist out there, and you've got a trust fund, or you don't mind, living in your buddy's place, crashing on a futon, somehow you're making a living. And it's also, it's not even just from a mercenary point of view. It's also if you want to, for instance, I love traveling. I want to go and work in London. And I want to be able to get helicopter shots. Somebody's got to pay for that, So again, it's where you affiliate yourself. It's the people that you affiliate yourself with. And right now, one of the things that has happened with music videos is they've had this loss of resources. Now, I would say that that's a double-edged sword, because it also, it's so easy for somebody who doesn't know anything about filmmaking to pay a whole lot of money and just hire all of these really talented people and get all of this great gear and pay for a great location, and all you're seeing on screen is money. And I'm sure we've all seen movies like that, where it's like, wow, 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 and then when it's over, you're like, don't remember anything because the story was crap and the acting was mediocre, So one of the things that it does is it forces people, the lack of the finances, the lack of the resources does finance you to be really creative in a guerrilla way, and I do like that. And if you affiliate with people who are like-minded, that can be a tremendous challenge and really rewarding.
Do you have a crew that you usually work with? How many people do you prefer on your crew?
Well, it scales up and down. You know, if I'm shooting in a bathroom, it's a heck of a lot less people than if I'm shooting in this auditorium or I'm shooting in a ballroom. Just an average type thing, if I was to go onto a situation that had a variety of moderate and average locations, is myself, and then I have 3 department heads. I have a camera department, a lighting department, and a grip department. Now, for those of you who don't know, the grip department is responsible. The lighting department sets the lights, and then the grip department manipulates the quality of the lights. So they might go in and flag stuff off, or they might go in and put tree branches up to create a pattern. The grip department also does rigging, and they do safety. Like if we're shooting off of a car, the grip department's the one who's going to be rigging pipes and things to the car so we can mount cameras and lights. And in those 3 departments, the head of the electrical department is a gaffer, of which there is only one. The head of the grip department is the key grip, and the head of the camera department is the first assistant camera. And underneath them, the camera crew, typically there's at least a first and a second, and sometimes a loader for film. If you're shooting high def, you don't really need a loader, but you might still have a third person there to help with logging and just the interface with production. The electrical department and the grip departments, you typically have a second in command, which would be the best boy. So you have a best boy electric and a best boy grip. And then under them, you're going to have 2 to 3 people on what I would consider an average production. If you have a really large location, you may have more people. You may even have 2 crews working in tandem where one is going ahead and pre-rigging. Like if I had a big ballroom or a restaurant, it might take a day or 2 to pre-rig it. So it scales up and down, but 4 people per crew on the electrical and grip, and 2 or 3 on the camera is about average.
That's a sizable number of people, though, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's just my crews. And also, that doesn't count if I have a Steadicam operator, if I have a crane operator, and that's just me. Then you've got makeup, you've got wardrobe, you've got hair, you've got the production department, which is the assistant director, and the PAs, which are the guys all running around with walkie-talkies. You may have a transportation department. You have an art department. You may have a greens department, which is responsible for landscaping type things. And you may have specialty departments, like if there's animals, you may have animal wranglers. You may have an on-set teacher if there's children. If there's, if for instance you're shooting something with music, you may have consultants, if you have a performer, typically not in a music video, but say in a feature film or in a commercial, and they're supposed to be playing piano and they don't really know how, you'll have a pro there to give them some moves so they at least look right. And then, when you go in for the close-ups, you're probably shooting that performer's hands.
Well, before I ask you about some specific things, people you worked with, do you still shoot on film, or are it all digital for you now?
Well, we're in a transition right now, and we alternate. I mean, it depends from job to job. Last year, I shot 2 feature films in high definition on the Sony F900, which is one of the state-of-the-art cameras. And this year, I shot Super 16, which is coming back into its own.
Really?
Super 16 was sort of a fringe alternative filmmaking stock in the 80s and 90s. It's been around for a while, basically. It's 16 millimeter stock with the right-hand perforations removed. And so you don't have the perforations and you don't have the soundtrack area there. So the intention being that ultimately you're going to deliver this in a different medium. Either it's going to blow up to 35 or it's going to transfer to television or digital. But the aspect ratio of it, which is the height to width ratio, matches almost identically high definition television signal. So you get an optimal image area transferring over to high definition. And because the quality of the film stocks are so good, you don't necessarily perceive grain in these transfers as long as you shoot it correctly. So it's something that a lot of people are opting for. There are a lot of quality issues to consider, a lot of aesthetic issues to consider when choosing between film and HD. and even if it's Pro HD or it's HDV, if it's 35 or it's 16, one of the most predominant things that becomes affected is the depth of field, which for people who are used to using cameras, obviously if you focus on me, I'm in focus. And depending on what your depth of field is, that's, is my knee in focus? Is that curtain in focus? And that's scalable. It's scalable depending on the distance. It's scalable depending on the stop. But optically, from a physics point of view, it's dependent upon relationships between the lens and the size of the target, the size of the area that's being imaged. Be that a CCD in a digital camera or be that a film frame in a 35 or 16 millimeter camera. And digital cameras are becoming so much more able to emulate characteristics of film cameras. The fact that you can shoot progressively now, that you can shoot 24 frames, you can shoot 24p on a camera like the Sony f900, which gives you full HD TV resolution, that being 1080 vertical by 1920 horizontal. That really gives you an awful lot of information. And you have a 48th of a second shutter that you can put on, which emulates the shutter characteristic of a film camera. Recently, a friend loaned me a V1U, a Sony V1U, which is a new Sony camcorder that's about $5,000. And it shoots a version of 1080p, 24p. And there's HDV compression involved. So if you have a lot of motion, it's going to block up. You're going to see that kind of blocking because of the way that it compresses. But if you don't have a lot of motion in your frame and you know how to shoot with it, you can just get amazing pictures, just truly staggering pictures out of this tiny little $6,000 camera. And I'll tell you, this feature that I shot last year, the last one that I shot on the f900, I've gone back and I've done some pickups. I've done some beauty shots, some nature shots, just some shots of trees and roads and things that are meant to cut in as inserts and to help make the edit flow. I've shot them on the V1U and they cut in seamlessly. So there's a lot of things to choose, and again, it becomes a very personal thing. There's a lot of good reasons to use digital cameras. For one thing, if you shoot on film, there are a lot of intervals or stages at which your image is subject to manipulation or interpretation, or it could become damaged. It can have mechanical damage, in the camera. It can have damage at the lab. One of the things about the HD stuff, obviously the tape can become damaged, but you're basically shooting your master, and you're outputting it on a monitor. And as long as you have a waveform monitor, which would be analogous, to a VU meter, a spectrum analyzer, you're looking exactly at all of the information digitally. It's not subjective. A monitor, anybody who has a television knows, grandpa's television can be green, or somebody's TV, the color tube can be going out, or, there's all kinds of things that you can do subjectively to screw that up. But as long as it's properly calibrated, the waveform monitor is going to give you the actual signal going in so that your exposure will be precise. And it's just such a quick tool to be able to lock stuff down. And, especially on lower budget stuff, it's a really, really handy thing to have, and it's a handy thing to be able to do. Having said that, I'm about to start on another feature that's all 35 millimeter. So it's all, it's still a period of transition, and I think that transition is going to last, another 10 or 15 years before, Kodak, phases out their film stock. I still, everybody's got to be able to prove themselves, no matter, even if your name has cachet and you've got articles in American Cinematographer, the entertainment business is very fickle, and it's all about what did you just do and who's hot right now, and so it's something I'm very conscious of. When I do projects, I publicize them, and I make sure that I pick things, even if I do some pet projects that maybe are just, for a strategic reason. You still have to be on the lookout for remaining on people's radar, for choosing projects that will cause you to have publicity and to deliberately not wait for the publicity machine to come to you, but to understand how it works and to take advantage of it.
How do you get your work? Do people call you, or do you network and just know where the work is and go get it?
Well, I tell you, it's very diverse. starting out, you know, you have to, it's all you. You don't have a name, you don't have a reputation. You got yourself and you got, you know, whatever card trick you can show. And so I went out and you know, I would shoot whatever. It might be a B camera on a job, or I might do pickups for somebody, or I might just shoot student films. Always learning, always trying to improve. After a while of doing that, you build up just a base of people who know you because they've worked with you for so long. And so people begin referring you because word of mouth travels. At a certain point, you know, you cross that threshold where your work is seen publicly. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the fact that I did so many really high-end music videos, it's sort of counterintuitive that it would get people in features excited that I did a Mariah Carey or a Britney Spears or a Moby video. But they do, you know? And whatever works, you take advantage of whatever works. It doesn't have to be logical. You know, it's a business of you know, flash and you know, and dazzling. And somebody once told me, because again, I'm a behind the camera guy. You know, I'm not the performer who's being photographed, be it an actor or a musician. But I'm one of the guys behind the camera who's capturing this and creating a look and evoking a mood. And so I felt a little bit, it's funny, you keep having these epiphanies all through your career. And each one of them is sort of one of those duh moments because it's just so obvious in retrospect. But one of the things that somebody told me once, because it was one of those things that I was not particularly inclined to affect a certain appearance, you know, in terms of, you know, the way I dressed. You know, I might have been up here with you know, a Rolling Stones t-shirt or what have you. But it was brought to my attention that it's show business. And you're in the show, whether you like it or not, all the time.
That explains the hat.
Yeah. My nod to my Texas heritage. But you want to be memorable, you know? And it's funny because I'm a really shy person by nature. You know, when I was in school, I would fade back into the crowd of the artistic and bright kids, and you know, was very, very timid. And but you realize that timidity and that and even not necessarily timidity, but just sort of. And it's interesting talking to people like Chris Sod, who I can identify with. Something that I think people who are from the South have is a mild-mannered quality, a politeness, a fact that, you know, that a genteel sort of quality. And it goes against your nature to insert yourself as bigger than life, to grab the spotlight. But you realize it's necessary, and you realize that it's expected, and you realize that, quite frankly, it's appreciated. You know, but it is about timing too, you know, because you don't always want to be just like, look at me, look at me, look at me. Right. So it's something you have to observe and learn, and again, you want people to know you, and you want to use that publicity. And when you have a big music video come out, or you have a big feature come out, I have a feature that I shot in Houston last year that's going to be premiering at South by Southwest. You know, and barring a work obligation, I'm going to be there at that premiere. You know, meeting and greeting people, being seen, you know, and it's all part of it. It's all part of it. You can't ever, I tell you, I won an MTV VMA award, which is the little moon man, for cinematography on Moby. We Are All Made of Stars. And I remember thinking, and this is well into my career, this is 15 years into my career, and I remember thinking, oh boy, the phone's going to ring tomorrow. Yeah. No, it did not. And the thing that astonished me, I talked to my agent and I said, yeah, are people asking about this? And, you know, a week later, they'd forgotten.
That's right.
It was a bookend.
That's right.
You know, honestly, and you know, even more, I think, publicly visible are things like the actors who win Oscars. Look at the list of names of actors who win Oscars, and how many do you know? You know, you and I probably know more than the younger generation, but it's still, you know, you see that a lot of these people peak out at that point. It was such a surreal experience winning that award. To this day, I don't feel like it happened. You know, And part of it, I think, is because I do it for the passion. I do it for the right reasons. Even though I talked to you earlier about money, and I talked to you about how important being financially aware is. This is a business where you are subject to absolutely unfathomable whims and caprices with respect to the business environment, with respect to your collaborators, and you have to love it. When you show up to work, it's because you are happy to be there and you are delighted to be there. And then when somebody hands you a check, wow, that's a bonus. And I've never forgotten that. And that kind of, connects back to the people I told you about who I'd seen who were jaded. They'd be damned to be there if they weren't getting paid, and they weren't getting paid enough anyway.
Right.
And I committed that to memory, and I realized, I don't want to. If it's that much of a heartache and a travail to be in this business, I don't want to do it.
Interesting. I was going to say, how do you get people to trust you?
By background, by experience, again, you show you can do it. You build it up piece by piece by piece.
Yeah, but they're taking a leap of faith by putting themselves in your hands, right? You are controlling their image to a certain extent at that point.
You have to have some crossover moments in your career. You have to have some moments where you get from not having ever shot anything to shooting something, from shooting something to shooting something significant, from shooting something to significant to shooting something just utterly groundbreaking. And again, that's about setting up affiliations and opportunities with the right people and getting them to trust you and getting them to be able to go out on a limb for you. It's just like last year. I hadn't directed and I hadn't aspired to direct. And yet, somehow, this had built up such that I was offered 2 separate things to direct because people had come to believe in me. They had come to see what I could do as a cinematographer, and so they thought, I bet this guy would be a good director on this project. And it's really, I think it's just a matter of proving yourself and establishing yourself. Once you have a few, it is important as a cinematographer to get recognizable names on your work. Because no matter how good it looks, unless you have recognizable names,
right,
it's really hard to get noticed. And I think that that's the same thing, too, as a musician. I think back a few years ago when Dave Matthews sang lead on a Blue Man Group song. And they shot a video and it got heavy rotation. I think people had heard of Blue Man Group, but I think a hell of a lot more people heard of Blue Man Group after Dave Matthews sang with them. So there's a lot about affiliation. There's a lot about, publicity. There's a lot about collaborating. And again, being aware of the fact that you are your own marketing campaign and being very careful of it, being very protective of it, being very, like I said, and I'll reiterate, sometimes the jobs you turn down are as important as the ones you take.
It takes a lot of courage to turn down a job when you're hungry, right?
It does, but you also have to realize that you are an investor. You're not necessarily investing in a stock market, but you're investing in yourself. And, there's no guarantees in the stock market. You could play the penny stocks, or you could play NASDAQ. You could buy commodities. And you could be a clever investor and still lose money. And one of the things that's really important to remember, and by the way, I'll say I also do a lot of my own hunting for work. I'll look at Craigslist. I'll look all over the place. I'm not too full of myself to look anywhere, And that's another thing is just don't ever get full of yourself. Be humble and modest enough to realize that opportunities can come from anywhere. But it's just really important to stay connected to those types of things and to be aware of how every decision affects you. And even if you're hungry, for instance, if somebody asks me to shoot something, here's an example. I personally am not a fan of tobacco companies. And I've told my agent under no circumstances would I shoot a cigarette commercial. And that's just me. I also happen to be a vegetarian, and I might question shooting a certain type of meat commercial. But it's just, again, it's staying true to my heart. And I think that that's true for everybody. You have to go where your heart tells you to go. I have a soft spot in my heart for doing stuff that is about open-mindedness, and it's about accepting people who are different than you and seeing the commonality in all human beings. So I really like work that explores diversity and that opens up diversity to a mass audience. I like work that looks, I can't really talk about the feature I'm up for right now because it's not done. But I'm up for a feature right now which looks at a really controversial topic, and it's a dark comedy. And I think, to me, it reminds me of movies like MASH, and hopefully some of you guys have seen the original MASH. It reminds me of La Cage aux Folles. MASH dealt with the Korean War in the midst of the Vietnam War, and it was a comedy. La Cage aux Folles, which was a French movie, dealt with homosexuality, but it dealt with it in a way of looking at these people as human beings first. So the wonderful thing about that type of movie, and the thing that I'm looking at right now, is it takes a topic that your mainstream audience is probably going to initially be turned off to, but because you're dealing with something that's funny and human and real characters, they're going to go watch it. And subversively, they're going to get some messages. And it doesn't mean they're going to be brainwashed, but it's going to give them something to chew on. It's going to give them something to think about. And I find those opportunities exciting. One of the reasons I like science fiction is because, done well, I think it gives you possibilities of the future. You look at, I'm a fan of Star Trek. I watched Star Trek when I was a kid. And it's this 1960s TV series that was canceled after 3 seasons, got a lot of flashy colors. But read how many people who are engineers and doctors and scientists and physicists and astronauts today who that put the seed in their mind. There's a lot of African Americans who got into the space program and got into sciences who were inspired by Lieutenant Uhura. It showed people these unlimited possibilities, and that's what gets me excited about being in this business. Is challenging people to examine themselves, to examine their culture, to examine the context of it all, to ask questions, to ask their own questions. By not shooting a cigarette commercial, I'm not telling you or any of these other people that you shouldn't smoke. But I'm also not tacitly, consenting to something that I don't agree with. So it's a body of work that when I reflect upon my body of work, I'm very proud of it. And that's why I say it's important to pick jobs. And sometimes you just have to turn jobs down. And I've had jobs that I looked at it and it was demeaning to characters, or it was demeaning to a part of the population, or it depicted the world or relationships in a way that I didn't feel comfortable with.
So you have a very strong moral sense about your work, then, an ethical sense.
I do.
It comes from how you were raised or how you perceive the medium? Or
It comes from how I was raised. It also comes from, like I said, when I was younger, I was very shy. And it's funny because being shy and being a little bit afraid of people, I would keep to myself. And I remember when I got into college, I opened up a bit more, and I was affiliating with some of my friends, and I would meet some of these kids who in high school had either just ignored me or picked on me, and we would have a dialogue, and they would say, "Oh, it's good to see that you're kind of a cool guy." And I said, they said, "You were a real asshole back in school because you didn't talk to anybody." And I said, "Well, it wasn't because I thought I was better than you. I was terrified of you." And it was a revelation because it never dawned on me ever. They
had a different point of view.
They had and you realize and you appreciate that. And you also appreciate that if somebody has a different point of view, you aren't going to change it, and you certainly aren't going to open their mind by hitting them with a counterpoint and saying, "You're just wrong, it's this way." That's where the subversive comes in. And again, it's not that I necessarily want to go around and tell people they're wrong, but all of us, including myself, including the example that I just gave you, we need to consider alternatives and think outside ourselves. Well,
let's talk about a minute about the role of apprenticeship and mentors. Did you have a mentor in your profession?
Yes, not in a hugely active sense, but in a slightly more passive sense. There's definitely a tradition in filmmaking, and I would say probably all the arts, where people feel that, when you become successful, it's a team effort. You know, it's your family, it's your friends, it's fellow peers, it's professionals, it's who gave you that first break, it's who believed in you, it's who loaned you some money to get from this period of time to that period of time because you weren't making any money. Nobody does it on their own, you know, at least not in my experience. And there's this whole concept of paying something forward, you know. When Chris Sod, I know Chris Sod, interestingly enough, because his uncle is a recording engineer in Houston. And back in the 80s, I played in bands. And so I knew his uncle from this recording studio. His uncle came out and recorded in LA a couple years ago. And he said, you know, my sister's son has some time off from school and he wants to come to LA. So I said, you know what? Have him come stay with me for free. They offered to pay. And I said, I'm not going to take your money. You know, I have a room. You're a student. Come take it. Put that money towards something you need to put it towards. And it's one of those things where you could say it's an obligation. You could say it's something that you really should do. But to me, it's a privilege. You know, it's a privilege to make that kind of a difference to someone, knowing how much of a difference those types of gestures made to me.
Right.
And I don't forget those people, and I remember them. And when somebody, you know, again, when Chris came and he says, you know, I want to pay you for the room, I said, here's how you're going to pay me for the room. When you're in a position to return this favor to some young person, you know, after you've established yourself in your career, that's when you pay me back.
That's how it works.
That's how it works.
You still got that extra bed?
I do. Hey.
I'll get you a stream of visitors.
Well, I tell you, no, I'll tell you what, I keep my figurative door open. If any of you guys want to email me, you know, feel free. You can look me up on the internet. But I don't have a hesitation putting those invitations out for a couple of reasons. One is I'm always surprised at how few people take me up on it.
That's true.
I was brought in to teach, to finish off a cinematography class at Columbia College about 10 years ago.
Right.
And these were people who were just on fire to shoot something. And it's a long story, so I won't go into the details, but because of the way the class had been going, they were not on track to shoot before their class ended. So I revamped it, I revised the structure, I got them shooting before the class was over. But the last day of the class, I said, you know, I'm about to do a feature. If any of you people would like to intern on this feature, I'm going to put a piece of paper on this table. Give me your name, your number, your email address, and I'll call you. And out of a class of about 30, I think 12 people put their names down. I called all 12. 2 of them actually showed interest. 1 of them showed up. Now, that fellow who showed up, it was a really low-budget movie. And the attrition, you know, one of the things about working for little to no money in my business, and probably your business too, is if you sit around and you demand money, well, you're probably going to be making coffee. If you're willing to work for free, you have opportunities to show your stuff in advance, and somebody's going to give you a chance to do something that they might not otherwise do. Because look, if it's about the money, they're going to pay somebody who's got the resume. So that was definitely something that I did, and it's something that I encourage people to do, is take some calculated risks. Again, you are investing in yourself. You know, there's no guarantees. If you go and you buy a stock off of NASDAQ, you may be down tomorrow. So it's the same thing. You know, take some chances. If you're not willing to invest in yourself, how the hell do you expect anybody else to invest in you? Be that taking a chance or putting money into you. You know, so develop your own brand, develop your own talent, develop your own skills. You got to be able to do that. And what this guy did is he came onto this job, and the attrition rate was so astonishing that 3 months into it, because it was actually a series of 3 movies, 3 months into it, he was the key grip, which, if you will recall, is the head of the grip crew. But that was based on him busting his tail and doing a great job, and he stayed around while all these other guys said, oh, I've got a job. And because he was the new guy, he didn't have somebody calling him for another job, so he just moved up, moved up, moved up. And I tell you, he was a key grip by the end of that 3 months. But he was sharp, and he was diligent, and he learned. And, you know, I've had other people that I've mentored, and it's a matter of, look, I can open the door for you, but once you walk through it, you got to do the dance.
Absolutely. There's
nothing I can't help you. But that's what he did, and to this day, he's working as a grip on television shows, that one fellow. So, and the other thing is when people get in touch with me, I don't just sort of freely dispense information. I'll give like assignments. I'll say, okay, if you're interested in working with me, here's a good book you should read. Here's, and it depends on the person, what they do. But I'll give them some stuff to do. I'll give them, I played guitar way back in the day, and I taught guitar lessons. And I remember having students who every single week I'm teaching them the same thing because they didn't practice last week. Drove me out of my mind. So when I started taking on students, I gave them something tricky that I knew would frustrate them if they weren't serious. And then they just wouldn't come back, And, but then conversely, I knew people wanted to start playing. So I'd give them something tricky. They'd had to get over that hill, but then I'd teach them a song as quickly as possible, to give them something to chew on. And I think that those things are important, because if I just keep throwing up obstacles and I keep giving them scales and I keep saying, do these scales and learn these chords and do this arpeggio, and they're not playing something that's that they recognize, I think it becomes frustrating. So that's the same thing I do when people contact me in the film business. I give them things to challenge themselves, because that's the other thing too. I could sit there, and I've done this in the early days, talked my ears off, or talk somebody's ears off for 2 or 3 hours, blah, 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 give them all the benefit of my experience and knowledge, and then they don't do anything with it. And I realize you have to do it for yourself. Right. You have to. I could tell you about everything that's in this wonderful book. You need to go read it. Right. Because the other thing is you don't want to be a Xerox of me, and that's something I'd really like to emphasize to this class as fellow creative people. Is I think you need to find your own muse, and you need to find the things when we talk about my convictions and my passions. I don't think you want to emulate somebody else. You can be inspired by people. You can take, derive ideas from people. You can stand on the shoulders of the greats who stood on the shoulders of the greats. But I think there's a trend in the creative community to emulate and copy far too much. And just like a copy of a copy of a copy, it begins to degrade after a while. As a cinematographer, I am frequently asked, who are your favorite cinematographers? And, I have people I like, but I understand the basis of that question. They want to know where I'm coming from visually. And I explain to them that most of my visual tools and insights have been developed. I'll be sitting in a cafe, and this beautiful light will be coming and lighting somebody's face in the corner. And I notice that. And I pay attention, and I realize it's skipping off of a shiny table and coming up. And I look at the real world a lot more than I look at a movie and say, oh, well, that's how they did it. Because the real world is so interesting, and it's so infinitely mutable. And I also use my own imagination and my own dreams and my own, again, I try as much as possible, paintings, photographs, even music, you close your eyes and you listen to music and you see images. And you and I, before this, were talking about that when we were younger, people would sit around and you'd put on a piece of music, a recording, a record, and a piece of vinyl, and you'd all sit around and you would listen to it front to back. And I just have such vivid visual memories of, listening to certain songs and certain albums, where I was not, as we said earlier, you said multitasking, I wasn't on the computer because there wasn't a computer. I was sitting around, and we were either just all listening to it, or I was laying in my bed listening to it, and I really committed myself to the unobstructed purity of that experience. And I think that as an artist, you need to have that ability. You need to be able to go into a museum and look at a painting and not just see a pretty picture. And you need to be able to listen to a song and not just hear a hummable melody, And again, it depends on each of your individuality. Are you listening to the arrangement? Are you listening to the way it was recorded? Are you listening to all of these qualities and aspects? Are you maybe not even being analytical, but you're being visceral and you're just feeling the way that this thing, the music moves through and makes your body feel? You close your eyes and what do you see? And so I think that all of those things are very, very important in terms of creating a creative persona. In terms of cultivating a creative persona, regardless of what creative realm you endeavor to make yourself a name in. Well, there's a dichotomy there, and it's something that really needs to be addressed. And I touched upon it earlier. It's the reason that music videos crashed and burned. You have to have a revenue stream. At the same time, you need to have an access to music for the audience. Because, again, if I go back to the paradigm when I was younger, you could buy 45 singles of just one song, analogous to an iTunes download. Or you could buy an album. Or you could listen to radio, and you could tape it off the radio. But if you taped it off the radio, there are a bunch of radio ads in there. And you could sit there and turn the recorder on and off. I mean, there's all kinds of ways around it. And one of the things that the record companies did to get people away from pirating was to offer attractive physical packaging. They would put posters and photographs and neat bric-a-brac in the albums to make you want to go buy the album. Because, heck, it's only, I don't know, back then $8, and you get a cool poster and all this fun stuff to put on your wall and a gatefold album. As music becomes more digital and not physical, and even as movies become more digital and not physical, you have this challenge. Now, one of the things with movies, because I was reading that iTunes has sold an incredible amount of Disney movies, and Disney is the only studio letting their movies out over iTunes. And one of the reasons that studios don't want to do that is that they're afraid that their brick and mortar vendors, which is to say Target, Walmart, Blockbuster, are going to get really pissed off at them because it's like, hey, we make our money selling the physical copies. But as Disney points out, and as iTunes points out, those movies you download off of iTunes don't come with the bonuses. They don't come with the behind the scenes and all of these. Again, it's enhancement to the products. And I've seen a lot more CDs these days that come double packed with a DVD that's got a concert on it or behind the scenes footage. Again, it's an incentive. Sure, you can download the iTunes thing, or you can, nab it off of Grokster or Morpheus or one of the other peer-to-peer thievery services. But if you're willing to go out and buy the CD, they're going to give you something extra. And so it's a give and take. I mean, on the marketing side, on the business side, you've got to be clever enough to give people an incentive to pay their money and to put the money down. But you also still have to make it available, just like, music plays on radio. So I think that having stuff on YouTube, from a certain point of view, I think it's great. I mean, I look at YouTube and I sit there and I think of, a music video I want to see, or I think of an old commercial or some interview with somebody, and there's all this wonderful obscure stuff on there. And one of the things that I personally think about YouTube, if I had some of my products showing up on YouTube, I wouldn't be all that worried about it because the image quality is just garbage right now. But at the same time, it's one of those things where I think, back when FM radio was the big mode of dissemination, there was a lot of, and you guys probably know this far more than I do, but there was a whole lot of, it was a big issue that the name of the song and the artist be announced. Because they could just do back-to-back music, but everybody wanted to make sure that you announced the name and the artist so that people could go out and buy it. And I think that, again, a solution has to be found for things like YouTube and, and Comedy Central, where, okay, if you put our clip up, you've got to put a link, to our store or what have you. And then I think it's a win-win situation. But I think people are rightfully rather terrified, and we all should be terrified because we're creators of intellectual property. You'd be very terrified at how portable it is and how easy it is to just nick it, And whereas in another day you could have a really nice living doing what you do, you can also put your hard efforts out that you go and you pay a lot of money to go to this school and you pay a lot of money to record some music, and then dozens and dozens of thousands and thousands of people are just taking it for free, and you have no remuneration, and you're still living with your folks when you're 35.
This would be unfortunate.
It may be unfortunate. If it doesn't get corrected, I might have to move back in with my parents. But I have faith. I do have faith. I think iTunes is a wonderful model, and I think there are other solutions. I don't think that's the only one. But you have a commodity. It's intellectual property. It costs money to make. It needs to be remunerated, but it also needs to be advertised. Much as FM radio. You don't have to pay for FM radio. Right. So all of those things need to be taken into consideration. It's a very interesting and dynamic time to be alive, both in terms of origination, because we have digital capture capabilities, digital manipulation capabilities. We have the old analog options. And there's just this mix. And the market is in transition, you know.
It's all true. Brad, we're going to have to stop.
Okay.
So thank you very much
All
for
righty.
being here.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much. Appreciate it. You have to go take
Thank
a
you.
class. Thanks a lot.
Oh, my pleasure.
So we'll see you next time.